At the end of the previous episodes, we entered the Monks Valley in Cappadocia. Continuing our drive, we arrived at the village of Çavuşin, a maze of narrow streets and homes carved directly into the region's soft volcanic rock. It is a small settlement in the heart of Cappadocia, yet one with a long and fascinating history dating back to the Byzantine era. In fact, it's one of the oldest settlements in the region. The history of Çavuşin reaches back to the early Christian period. Byzantine communities once flourished here, carving churches and homes into the soft volcanic tuff. Over time, however, centuries of erosion and a series of earthquakes forced most of the inhabitants to abandon the village. Fortunately, its unique historical charm has survived. After finding a small parking area on a nearby hill, we decide to explore the surroundings. Marta grabs the 360 camera while I send the drone up for a closer look at the spectacular rock formations surrounding the village. Çavuşin is undoubtedly a journey into Cappadocia's past. The first buildings here actually date back to Roman times. Cappadocia became part of the Roman Empire in AD 17 during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. The region quickly became one of the empire's most important frontier territories, lying at the crossroads between Roman influence and that of the Parthians and later the Persians. The Romans soon realized that Cappadocia's soft volcanic tuff offered remarkable construction possibilities. The rock was relatively easy to excavate while providing excellent thermal insulation. As a result, the first storage rooms, shelters and simple underground spaces began to appear here during the Roman period. This was not yet the Cappadocia as we know today, but it marked the beginning of a centuries-long process in which people gradually adopted this extraordinary volcanic landscape to suit their needs. Back then, this was also a highly unstable region. Cappadocia frequently witnessed the passage of armies, political unrest, and invasions from the east. It was precisely because of this that the landscape itself began to take on a defensive role. The valleys, the soft volcanic rock, and the ability to carve shelters directly into the hills offered the local population something the open plains of Anatolia could not: a place to hide. It was during this period that the first more elaborate rock-cut chambers began to appear. Centuries later, in the Byzantine area, they would evolve into vast residential complexes, monasteries, and entire underground cities. Over time, these simple shelters gradually developed into something far more sophisticated. Looking at these formations today, it's difficult to think of them as individual caves. They were fully functional homes carved directly into the rock itself. At first glance, all you see are irregular openings scattered across the walls of the towering tuff formations, but a closer look reveals that these cliffs were once thriving communities. Different levels were connected by wooden staircases, walkways, and rock-cut tunnels, while the interiors were divided into living quarters, storage rooms, stables, and spaces used for preserving food and wine. The soft volcanic tuff was perfectly suited for this purpose. It could be carved relatively easy using simple tools, yet it also provided excellent insulation against Anatolia's extreme temperatures. The interiors remain cool during the scorching summers and pleasantly warm throughout the winter, making life inside the rock surprisingly comfortable, often more so than living in conventional buildings. As time went on, these settlements also took on a religious role. Cappadocia became a refugee for some of the earliest Christian communities, who used the extraordinary landscape not only as a place to live, but also as a place to worship and to hide during times of persecution. And perhaps that's what makes this place so extraordinary. Rather than try to conquer or reshape the landscape, people learned to live within it. Instead of rebuilding nature, they adapted to it so completely that the boundary between architecture and the natural world almost disappeared.
Tam czuję, że może być dobra miejscówka na górze. Czy nie?
No, tak wygląda. Pytanie tylko, jak się tam
Dostać?
dostać.
Nie wiem, kurde. Tak jakby oni wyglądają, to tutaj to wygląda... Kurde, nie ma...
To raczej wygląda, jakbyśmy mogli jechać dołem, nie?
No, a tam pewnie to jest taka z drugiej strony.
Give me just a minute to find the courage to say what's on my mind. 'Cause I've been holding out for a sign. Now you got the best of me. Deep down you've been hiding the answer. You won't say 'cause you don't want a fanfare. Don't change, I just wanted to know who you are, who you are.
As you heard, once we drove deeper into the valley, we started looking for a place to spend the night. We had our sights set on a spot high up on a plateau, hoping for an unobstructed view of the valley at first light. There was just one problem. We had absolutely no idea how to get up there. The navigation repeatedly led us to dead ends and tracks that simply didn't offer any way to climb higher, so for the next half hour or so, we wandered through this spectacular landscape, weaving between its extraordinary rock formations and the endless array of tourist activities taking place here on an almost industrial scale. Meanwhile, the valley became even more magical as the setting sun slowly painted the rocks formations in shades of purple. It's the kind of scenery that begs to be admired in complete silence, but that's simply not possible. Every few moments, the roar of another engine shatters the stillness. ATVs, off-road vehicles, buggies and motorcycles are constantly crossing the valley. It all feels slightly surreal. Among rock formations that have stood here for tens of millions of years, dozens of tiny vehicles weave their way through the landscape, each leaving behind a long trail of dust. Everywhere you look, someone is offering another guided tour, another sunset excursion, another off-road adventure. It's a full-scale tourist machine that rarely slows down. And it's hard to blame anyone for that. Cappadocia has become one of the world's most recognizable landscapes. Thousands of people come here to experience it from the ground, from the air, from a hot air balloon, or from behind the wheel of an ATV. The setting sun reveals a completely different side of Cappadocia than the one most visitors see in the middle of the day. The white and cream-colored slopes gradually take on shadows of gold, pink and deep purple. Long shadows stretch across every ridge, while the iconic tough chimneys begin to reassemble towering sculptures rising from the surface of another planet. I have to admit, we had an absolute blast driving through the valleys ourselves, well, except for a few spots where Marta was definitely pushed outside her comfort zone. As is so often the case on camera, the video doesn't really do justice to how steep the descent actually was. Although, to be fair, it wasn't that steep after all.
Bardziej to przede wszystkim odkryć, żeby patrzeć, co się przed nami dzieje.
Już co chuja. Nie jestem w stanie tego nagrać.
When we spotted that pink Defender, we figured its owner might know the way. We decided to stop and ask how to get to the viewpoint we'd been trying so hard to reach.
Ja go zapytam, czy on wie, jak
Zapytaj
to...
go.
As it turned out, that decision couldn't have worked any out better. Just a few minutes before sunset, Cappadocia undergoes its final transformation of the day. The light becomes soft, warm, and almost horizontal. It no longer shines down from above but glides across the surface of the rocks, revealing every fold, every crack, and every layer of volcanic tuff. The pale white slopes slowly surrender to deep shades of crimson, copper, and purple. For a brief moment, it feels as though the entire valley is glowing from within. Seen from above, the landscape resembles a living organism. Smooth ridges and rock formations spread out in every direction like frozen waves, sculptured over millions of years by wind, rain, and time. No two formations are alike. Every ridge has its own rhythm, every valley its own shadow. It is at this very moment that you begin to understand why Cappadocia looks less like a natural landscape and more like a masterpiece painted by nature itself. The setting sun doesn't simply illuminate the valley, it transforms it. The entire landscape feels like a giant living sculpture shaped by millions of years of erosion. There are no straight lines here, everything flows. With every passing minute, the crimson light climbs higher up to the rock faces, while the valley floors are already sinking into the cool blue tones of approaching night. The ridges, ravines, weathered gullies, and towering rock spires create a landscape that resembles a frozen ocean far more than a mountain range. And then, after nearly an hour of searching, it finally happens. After countless wrong turns, we eventually reach the plateau we'd been trying to find all along. At precisely the moment when the last rays of sunlight are still brushing the surrounding rocks. It's almost as if the landscape had been waiting for us. In just a few minutes, everything will fade. The deep purples will give way to midnight blue, the dust will settle, and silence will finally return to the valley. But before night falls, we have one more task. We need to set up camp while there's still a little daylight left.
Po drugiej stronie tam są jakieś boksy. Ale ja chyba wolałbym zostać tu. Teraz tak, zachód był tam, wschód będzie tam, tak? Wschód będzie tam, więc obróćmy się plecami do miasta, żeby otworzyć przed sobie okienko. Oglądać sobie miasto, które rozświetla się blaskiem wschodzącego słońca. Jest cały nasz teren ogrodziłem, kazałem ogrodzić.
Zobacz, górę widać.
O, i górę widać. Tak, właśnie tak miało być.
Tam ognisko możemy zrobić sobie, jak jest przygotowane.
No. Zostawię się tak, że po prostu w ten sposób to też nie działa na mnie.
Jak zawsze tak to wygląda.
Tak. Może trochę wciąż jest na lewo, ja muszę wyjść.
It was a very welcome pee break. While I was answering nature's call, Marta made good use of time by shooting a panoramic view of our campsite for the night. After nightfall, I decided to take a closer look at the nearby Göreme, often described as the heart of Cappadocia. But with an uninterrupted view of the Ucisa castle, sitting about 4 kilometers away as the crow flies, I couldn't resist putting my drone to the test and flying straight toward it. The flight over Göreme itself took just under 2 minutes, and during that time I was genuinely impressed by the capabilities of the Mavic 3 sensor. The image quality is remarkable considering how little light was available. The shadows remain virtually noise-free, while even dimly lit streets retain an impressive amount of detail. Just a few years ago, this level of low-light performance would have been almost unimaginable. DJI claims a top speed of around 54 km per hour in normal mode, and that proved to be pretty accurate. I covered the 4 km distance in about 5 minutes. Unfortunately, the advertised 8 km video transmission range turned out to be rather optimistic. As soon as I reached the castle, the video feed started freezing and I began losing control of the drone, leaving me with only one sensible option: turn around and head back. Perched on the highest point in Cappadocia, Uçhisar Castle is often referred as the Eye of Cappadocia. From its summit, you can take in virtually the entire region, from the snow-capped mountain Erciyes, the highest mountain in central Anatolia, all the way to Mount Hasan on the opposite horizon. Göreme itself is one of the most visited destinations in Cappadocia. Remarkably, many local residents still live in homes carved directly into the soft volcanic rock. Visitors also can spend the night in a cave hotel or a beautiful restored Ottoman house. More importantly, the town is home to over 30 rock-cut churches dating from the 9th to 11th centuries, carved into the region's distinctive volcanic tuff. When the night slowly loses its depth and the black sky gives way to cool shades of deep blue and purple, the rocks and houses emerge from the darkness, as if the landscape were awakening layer by layer. But before the sun fully illuminates the landscape, the spectacle that has made Cappadocia famous around the world begins. Just a few minutes ago, these valleys were shrouded in darkness. Now, the night has retreated just enough for the first light to find its way between the rock formations. There is no dramatic sunrays here. Instead, there is a slow transformation. The deep blue of the night sky gradually fades into a cool shade of blue, while a delicate band of purple appears on the horizon. A landscape that had existed only as a silhouette throughout the night slowly regains its shape, its texture, and its depth. And that's when the daily ritual begins. At first, just a few flashes. Brief bursts of flame illuminate the inside of the balloon envelopes. Then another and another. Scattered across the valley, they reassemble giant lanterns being lit one after another before dawn has even arrived. For a moment, the balloons seem to be made more of light than fabric. Their colors remain hidden in the half-light. All you can see is the warm glow of the burners shining through the material and their silhouettes drifting against the cool morning sky. From every valley and behind every rock ridge, more balloons begin to appear. Some climb slowly into the sky, while others drift just above the ground, carried by invisible layers of the morning air. It isn't a chaotic crowd, it's a calm, almost hypnotic dance where every balloon seems to know exactly where it belongs. Only now, as the sky grows brighter, do their true colors begin to reveal themselves. Reds, yellows, blues, stripes, patterns and logos that only moments ago were hidden by the darkness. Every balloon is different, yet together they create a scene unlike anywhere else on Earth. I'd imagined a morning exactly like this for months, but no photograph, no video and no travel story could have prepared me for the sheer scale of the spectacle. The balloons are literally everywhere, above the valleys, above the rock ridges, over roads and fields, at different altitudes, drifting in different directions, and yet the entire scene feels remarkably peaceful, as though the sky itself had begun to breathe. Staring at my drone controller, I have the distinct feeling that I'm flying alongside them. They became part of the same morning rhythm, floating about the valleys just as they come to life. From above, Cappadocia feels even more surreal. Roads wind between the soft ridges of volcanic tuff. Small villages and patches of green farmland seem almost insignificant compared to a landscape that nature spent millions of years sculpturing. And above it all, instead of birds, dozens of colorful balloons drift silently through the sky. press so close that for a brief moment they fill the entire frame. The unmistakable roar of a burner echoes through the air before silence quickly returns. Nothing but the sound of the wind and the gentle movement of the balloons. Every few moments, another balloon appears directly above our camp. One glides almost over the roof of the prowler, another drifts past at eye level, calmly making its way toward the next valley. That sense of proximity makes the entire experience feel almost tangible. It's hard to believe that this happens every single morning when the weather allows. And that, less than an hour later, almost no trace of it remains. One by one, the balloons begin their descent. Once again, the valleys fill with the sounds of cars and tourists. The sun finally takes control of the landscape. But we weren't the only ones who had witnessed this morning's spectacle. For some, it was just a brief stop before crawling back into bed to catch up on the sleep they'd sacrificed for sunrise. I spent the last few moments capturing the morning in a handful of photographs. For the first time since sunrise, I can simply pause and take it all in without looking through my drone controller. Instead, I soak into the awakening landscape and the first warm rays of the morning sun, while Marta chats with fellow travelers, exchanging impressions of what we've just witnessed and sharing stories from our journey through Turkey so far. But for that one magical hour, balanced between night and day, Cappadocia feels as though the laws of gravity simply cease to exist. And perhaps that's why this place stays with you long after the journey is over. Not because there are so many balloons, but because for one fleeting moment you truly feel as though you're floating among them. Before we continue our journey, we decide to make one more stop. It's probably the most famous valley in all Cappadocia, Love Valley. But before we get there, something else catches my attention. The tortoise is slowly making its way across the road.
Nie, to jest żółw, ale on nie ma jak przejść, mu jest ciężko, muszę go przejść.
The car ahead of us only just misses it, passing with the tortoise directly between its wheels. I don't want to risk the next driver being any less fortunate or simply not noticing it at all. It only takes a few steps to move the little traveler to safety and let it continue its journey in peace.
Ciężko.
Tak?
Stawiam nadzieję, że poradzi w tej trawie.
Love Valley owes its name to the towering rock pillars known as fairy chimneys, with their distinctive, unmistakable phallic shapes sculptured by nature over millions of years from soft volcanic tuff. Some visitors come here mainly for the humorous associations, while others are simply fascinated by the valley's extraordinary geology. Whatever the reason, it's hard to deny this place its unique character. And this is where we're heading before we finally leave Cappadocia behind. Marta decides to grab a camera and go for a short walk, while I want to get a bird's eye view of the area, so we split up for a while. Love Valley lies less than 5 kilometers from the town of Göreme. Hiking enthusiasts often cover this distance on foot, enjoying the local scenery along the way, including the many vineyards. Although the rock formations themselves appear stark and barren, the valley floor is remarkably fertile. Thanks to high moisture levels, numerous orchards grow here, mostly apricot trees, as well as vineyards that local people have cultivated using traditional methods for centuries. The trail running along the valley floor is considered one of the most peaceful in the region, so if you're looking for a little escape from the tourist crowds, this is your place. Descending to the floor of Love Valley is the moment when Cappadocia's mass tourism suddenly falls silent. What remains is space and silence, rarely disturbed by anything other than the rustling of the grass. The path leads through a deep canyon, above which gigantic columns, several dozen meters high, rise into the sky. Seen from below, these monumental tuff formations lose their playful touristy context. They become a raw, almost sacred display of nature's patience, silent gardens of time that have withstood millions of years of erosion. But the most beautiful part of the valley is hidden at the very bottom, in the shadow of these giants. Sometimes right under your feet. Among fallen fruit worn by the sun, you can spot one of the valley's permanent residents. A land tortoise quietly celebrating a ripe apricot it has found. In that one frame, the whole truth of this place is contained. The power of geology meets the fragile, charming everyday life. The idyllic atmosphere suddenly gives way to rising tension. At one point, Marta notices me drifting off the trail while the prowler leaning dangerously to the right.
Jezus.
Moments later, the valley's silence is shattered by my voice calling out to her.
No idę.
In the footage, the whole situation doesn't look particularly dangerous, but trust me, sitting behind the wheel, I was convinced we were about to roll over. It all started because I was trying to film the moving car with the drone. It was struggling to lock onto the vehicles in tracking mode, so I kept nervously glancing at the controller, waiting for it to finally pick up the subject, and I drifted slightly to the right, just enough for the car to get pulled toward the ditch. From inside the vehicle, it was hard to fully assess the situation, so I called Marta over to act as a counterweight, allowing me to step out and see how screwed we actually were. To make things even more interesting, there was a depression in the ground right next to the front right wheel, making the situation even more complicated. I decided to use the recovery boards to level and, in a way, reinforce the ground beneath it. Unfortunately, removing them meant further unloading the left side of the vehicle, which was the last thing I wanted. But I didn't really have a choice, so Marta leaned back with full commitment, increasing the leverage of her body weight as much as possible. I think anyone who has ever driven an expedition-built Defender can confirm that these vehicles are not exactly known for their stability. They're relatively narrow, and in my case, the pop-up roof construction combined with most of the expedition gear stored inside, largely on the right-hand side, significantly raised the vehicle's centers of gravity. Honestly, I have a strong feeling that if I weren't for the rear air suspension, rolling over to the right at that point would have been highly likely. So to avoid disaster at all costs, I decided to unload everything possible from the right side of the car to lighten it and lower its center of gravity. Once everything that could be unloaded was sitting on the side of the trail, the moment of truth had arrived. Well, that's it. Panic over.
A ty mnie nie graj, jak mi nie działa. Hell. Auto pojechało. Trochę zostało. That's the way it goes. Unable to switch subjects. Function only supports following vehicles. This is not vehicle. This is nightmare.